A very good evening, a warm welcome to another very chilly day in Johannesburg. Even more to come tomorrow. There are rumours there'll be more snow, so if there is, expect a deluge of very light flutterings on every possible social media platform as Johannesburg has abandoned work. If you're in Cape Town, you'll know what that's like on a Friday, and get stuck in to the cold weather. Cold weather requires some red wine to warm you up, and that's exactly what we've got on Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows this evening. And it's not just wine from current vintages. We're going back in time a little, because amongst our celebrations on the show today, the wine of Simonsig, which is an estate and a brand steeped in history, so many contributions to South African wine over the years. And one of the key people in the Simonsig story is a guy called Johan Malan, and he's going to be joining me very shortly, because coming up next Saturday, the 29th of July, it is Vintage Day at Simonsig, and the chance to drop in at the estate and purchase some fantastic wine. A little later on in the show, we'll be talking about that and how you get a special discount as a Dan Really Likes Wine viewer to go along and enjoy not just a wonderful day of tasting, but also the opportunity to buy some older wine and stock up the cellar. It's a really cool opportunity. Johan, not my only guest, though. In fact, sitting beside me, you can probably feel his aura, the chiseled figure of Stellenbosch photographer Thys Lombard, who also happens to be one of the most dedicated, enthusiastic wine marketers on the planet. And he was flying through Johannesburg on the way to the airport, so he stopped off armed with a bottle of cabernet franc to join me and give me some updates on what's been happening at Oldenburg, and in particular cabernet franc, which is a grape on the up and up and up. So that is Dan Really Likes Wine from Goodfellows this week, a trip down to Simonsig and a home tasting with Oldenburg with Thys. Before we catch up with Thys and Johan, though, let's jump across and get a quick look at some of the latest wine news. Oh, this is brand new at Brookdale. There's some really exciting stuff out of Brookdale. The person who's headlining it is the person on picture. Now, it might look like she's somebody from Standard 6 busy pouring wine. She's actually close to 30 or thereabouts. That is Chiara Scott, the winemaker at Brookdale, who we featured a number of times on the show. She was making waves in London just a couple of weeks ago, and her estate is now making waves of the excited sort as the Parle estate sets up a drip and sip, they're calling it. The chance to go out to the estate at Brookdale and to try some of the wines that Chiara is making, wines that are very, very well priced, but also are bearing the increasingly well-known trademark of a young winemaker who's just delivering some really, really good stuff. The chance to try those Mason Road wines, the Serendipity Rosé, the Mason Road Chenin Blanc, and the Mason Road Syrah. There's also the newly launched Grenache Syrah Cinsault Petit Syrah, the GSM label. And to try all of those, you'll also get thrown in with some of Gary Coetzee food. 320 rand for two people at the bistro at Brookdale. Wine and food. That is a rather good deal in a beautiful spot at an estate that is just getting better and better known, mostly because of the work of Chiara, but also because of the food and wine experience. And that's a new addition they're in. So next time you're in the Parle area, there's one to drop in on. And this is coming up on the 2nd of August, a tasting with Waterford, and your chance to go through a number of wines from the reasonably historic Stellenbosch estate and run through Mark Leroux's wines. In picture there, you can see the Gem, which is the wine for which is particularly well known, but some great cabs as well amongst the different wines on show. So there'll be a chance to come down to Norman Goodfellows in 4 ways, run through the wines of the Waterford estate, sample them and celebrate the latest vintages to kind of there. If you'd like to come along, simply head over to the Norman Goodfellows website, and it costs you 100 rand. That money all goes to charity. You'll come down, canapes on show, and a chance to try some really good wine from Waterford Wednesday, the 2nd of August at Norman Goodfellows in 4 ways. All right, so we have some really cool wine to drink. In just a moment, I'm going to be opening some wine from Oldenburg and the Cabernet Franc. But first of all, from somewhere on the side of a road in Stellenbosch, I think, because he's a bit of a local celebrity. He's dashing from one event to another and dropping in on the show digitally in between. Welcome back to Dan Really Likes Wine, Johan Malan. Lovely to have you on. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of the show, and welcome back to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks very much for having us. Good to talk to you again and your listeners and viewers.
Now, I'm glad you've put the jacket on. I'm glad you've realised it's that kind of show, Johan, and you need an upmarket look, which you've pulled off effortlessly. Lovely to have you back in the context of a really special day. And I think Vintage Day for Simonsig probably means so much more than it might at other estates, because it's more than just looking at some older wine. It's a chance for you, for the family, for the brand, to look back at a pretty extraordinary period of time that Simonsig has had.
Yeah, I think, we always think that in order to prove that your wines have got the ability to last and not only the ability to mature, I think the main issue here is to indicate that they get better with time. And it's not always possible for the normal wine consumer nowadays to have a big cellar and to keep wines for 10 or 15 years. And that really started the idea a few years ago for us to open the cellars and open our vintage and show people that we have older vintages available. And that's what's happening on Vintage Day, that showing people we've got about 40 different wines from the vintage of older vintages, just to show them that you can not only taste these wines, but they're also available for purchase. That you can buy a wine that's 10 years of maturation behind it and enjoy it immediately. It's not always possible for the average wine lover to have that in their own cellars.
It's all well and good to drink older wine simply because it is older wine. Oh, look, here's a 20-year-old wine. Let's drink it. We can tell everybody we drank wine from 2003. There's a lot more to it, particularly in terms of our understanding and appreciation of the evolution of wine. For you as a winemaker, how important is it to see wine going through those different stages, becoming a different wine with age, and then allowing people like me to drink it and to appreciate it and to understand how your wine is transitioning?
Yeah, wine is always very dynamic. Most people will buy wine from the shelf when it's about 2 or 3 years old, which is relatively young. And we all know that mostly red wines, but also white wines, do have the ability to mature, and they get better with time. And the idea of the Vintage Day is that to give people the opportunity to come to Simonsig and experience older wines, and also be able to acquire some of these wines. I always think that wines are constantly changing. When they are young, the fruitiness and the wood is obviously more noticeable and upfront. But as time goes on, these flavors and the fruit and the wood integrate much more. The secondary flavors start to develop, and that makes the wines more complex and give them more depth of flavor. And that is something that makes tasting and drinking wine so much more rewarding, that it's not something that remains constant. And with the added advantage of time, they change in character and become maybe more pleasurable. And this is the idea, that when we do the Vintage Day, we spend a lot of time tasting through various vintages to decide which ones are really showing well at this time. And so it's not the same wines that are being showed every year. We do change them around. And what I'm particularly excited about is that we also do some of the older vintages of our Kaapse Vonkel, because that's one of my personal favorites, is the older Cap Classique wines because sometimes I think they mature as good as, sometimes even better than really good red wine over time.
I was going to ask you about that, so you've answered part of my question. But what my understanding of how these wines age is from when I get to drink them, but I don't come from the point of departure. You do. How much do some of these wines surprise you down the road in terms of what they become, and how does that help you to learn and to adjust and to go forward as a winemaker, drawing from how you've seen past vintages develop?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most vintages tend to have a certain, they get rated quite early on, as we know in more recent years. The 2015s have been incredibly highly rated, and then very soon after that, the 2017 vintage came along, and we all thought, which one now is the best or the better one of the two, and since then, we've also had vintages that are probably going to reach a similar heights, and like 2020, I think 22. So I think that makes loving and drinking and enjoying wine so interesting, because um, you can have a whole discussion about whether the 15s or the 17s are the best or better than the other. And then you have more recent vintages also with potential showing that. So I don't think there's one final answer. It's all about what happens, or what's in the glass and what you're enjoying at the moment. And wine is not something that's as exact and as precise, because a lot of the pleasure and the enjoyment you get out of the wine is very personal. It's very subjective, and it's not about what is written or what is rated by other people. In the end, it's a lot about what's your own personal decision, and that makes it very, it gives you a lot of freedom.
We're going to be tasting 3 of the wines that you'll be able to encounter at Vintage Day just a little later in the show, and getting some guidance from Johan. Before I jump over to Thys and welcome him to the show, last word in this broader space, Johan. The Simonsig story is very much a family one and a family affair. As you drink wine from years gone by, how much of a family time capsule is this? The ability for you to go back generations and think back to the memories of years gone by from a family perspective at Simonsig.
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate growing up with my father, who was, one thing I learned from him was that he really loved wine, but he was also very inquisitive and always researched or wanted to explore wines from not only our own cellar, but especially from other producers in South Africa and also internationally. So I think I got the message from that you must look far and wide and be inspired by wines from other regions, and you never stop learning. And that I think that the first wine that I ever experienced that sort of made sense to me was a wine from Uitkyk, just down the road from us, behind Kanonkop. And that was 1958, 59, 1960. And he had quite a few bottles of those. And I remember that these wines just made an impression on me, that they were incredibly concentrated, beautiful fruit and flavor. So I think that was when I was probably still in primary school, so I was legally allowed to drink, but it stuck to my memory, and it is I think that's the way you get the wine in your blood eventually, and that's one thing that I'm really privileged to be the beneficiary of.
And we, in turn, are privileged to be drinking that wine. And I know you've drunk a fair amount of wine. I think you might also be related, because aren't you married to a Malan, Thys?
Yeah, the Malans don't always make good choices. So my wife chose to marry me, but she's a Malan. So yeah, Johan, definitely somewhere in the history we might be related.
Johan's denying it furiously. Let's talk a little bit about the Oldenburg space, because it's one you find yourself in. You've spent a lot of time teaching, taking photographs, being involved in the sports world. But I think if you ask most people in the South African wine industry, who does the most miles, who's most likely to pitch up at a bottle store in a corner of Belgium no one's ever been to, or be discovered in a restaurant somewhere in Zambia, it's probably going to be Thys from Oldenburg. You have this combination of a love of wine and a real sense of wanderlust.
Yeah, I think wine and photography, both of them open up the introduction to people. And my passion is actually the people behind the wines and behind the photos that I take. But I must say, Dan, I've bumped into you in some obscure places as well overseas. So maybe we travel as much. But yes, no, wine's given me the opportunity to see the world. My very first trip was actually to Moscow to go and sell wine. I think it was 2005. I was still working at Lawrenceford Estate. And I think the guys probably thought I wouldn't make it back. It was minus 25 when I arrived there, and it snowed 5 days, consecutive days of snowing. But I made it back.
Just to be clear, if I'd known he'd been to Russia, he wouldn't have been on the show. There's not much I can do about it now. The space you find yourself now in Oldenburg, it's a brand that's not one of the massive mainstream brands, but it is one that I'm seeing a lot more of. And obviously I keep an eye out for it, knowing you, knowing Nick, knowing Adrian. You've got a really good team there. Do you get a sense from the inside that selling Oldenburg is not getting quite so tough? More people are knowing about it, understanding it, where before you had to kind of persuade them to have a glass and then they were blown away. Now they're really keen to have it because they know who you are and what you do.
So first of all, it's really tough to sell Oldenburg. No, Dan, Oldenburg is becoming a brand where people are actually now phoning in every now and again. It's a boutique winery. Our production is really small. I think at the moment we're less than 100,000 bottles, which is really boutique and small. But it gives Nick the opportunity to be really hands-on. You know, he walks those vineyards every day before harvest. He tastes the grapes. Between him and his dog, I don't know who eats the most grapes, because his dogs follow him around and they also sample the grapes. But, you know, small and boutique gives us the opportunity to really dig in and do things properly. And as you know, you've met Adrian. I think you've been on a hike with Adrian quite recently.
Reluctantly.
If ever there was an owner that was passionate about creating something special, it's Adrian van der Spy. So a real privilege to work with Oldenburg. I've been there, I think, just short of 7 years now. So I've seen the changes. Obviously, adding Nick to the frame was really special. Nick joined in 2019, so he did some of the 2017 and 18 blends. But I can really see the advances we're making, and it's becoming a little bit easier to convince the people to open a bottle.
And that's a really important marriage that you've got with Nick and Oldenburg, because he came off the back of Warwick. He had a really good stint. They made some beautiful wine, accepted this new challenge. But it's not simply a case, well, here's a good winemaker, we'll drop in the middle of this, the magic will happen. He's someone who I've seen has taken the time to wander Rondecop, not as much as you do, but walk around, get a real sense for the kind of soils you have, for the space that you have, and really work to get the best out of what's on offer.
Yeah, I think what we're doing at Oldenburg that I really enjoy is that most of the work does happen in the vineyards. You know, Adrian's grew up on that farm, the owner, Adrian van der Spy, and he's known the farm all his life. And then when he bought the farm and he started developing it, obviously he learned a lot. So it's 20 years later now, we've gone through a process where we pulled out a lot of vineyards because of leaf roll virus. You know, you can either deny it or you can do something about it. We decided to eradicate leaf roll virus. We've made a massive investment to pull out vineyards and to replant. And we test every vine every year. We've got a laboratory on the farm. So a lot of the work happens in the soils, on the vineyards, before it gets to the cellar. And I think, you know, when you start with very good building blocks, it's so much easier to end up with a top class product.
And you've got to have a long-term vision. We're talking to Johan now, and you've got in Simonsig an estate with such a steeped history. Yeah. You guys are a lot younger than that as an Oldenburg brand. So you've got to have patience. You've got to have this 5, 10, 15, 20-year vision of where we want to be. How much easier is it to keep your eye on that ball and say, right, well, it might be Thys Jr. or Adrian Jr. or Nick Jr. who's completing what we've set out to do now, when you see people like Johan and watch how their generations have gone through.
I think Adrian understands that it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time to, wines. If you replant a vineyard, it takes 3 or 4 years before you can get the first grapes off those vineyards. Then you make wines, and they might not be the wines that we want to put in the Oldenburg label. So you sell a bit of those wines in bulk, and then you eventually get to the point where they're good enough to go into either the CL or the Oldenburg range, and then you mature it for a year or two in bottles. So you're talking 7, 8, 9 years later, you will be able to sell those wines. So if you don't have patience, you're not in the right game. But it's also a balance. Every now and again you get these small little victories, and you get awarded and you win a trophy for a wine, and you just think everything's going to fall into place and you're going to take off, and then you take a step back every now and again, and you realize it will take some more time. But I think Adrian is very involved in selling the wines and talking to people, trying to find new agents around the world. He's also had doors closed in his face. It's not just the wine salesman who gets doors slammed in their faces. And so he's quite switched on with what's happening in the world of wine. He also drinks a lot of international wines, and he benchmarks against that. And he understands that whatever we do in the vineyards might only show 2 or 3 years later. And then you know whether you were right or wrong in doing what you're doing. But most of the time we're getting it right. It feels like it.
We've both got some wine poured here from Simonsig, so I'm going to be trying that in a second. Before I jump back to Johan to guide me through it, the wine that you do oversee has taken you to all sorts of corners of the world. You talk about Adrian's international drinking. What is the coolest place that wine has taken you? And by that I mean it's fun as opposed to -25 in Moscow.
Well, Moscow was certainly interesting because I did 2 years national service. So when I arrived there, I was too scared. Thys Lombard, being too scared to take a picture. I was honestly too scared to take photos on the Red Square because I thought someone's watching me. And those were before the days of drones. So Moscow's been interesting. I must say I really like Manhattan, New York. Oldenburg has taken me to New York. It's a bustling city. I love going back to London. There I've got lots of mates like Greg and Tim Atkin and again from iTimber, so it's lovely to go back to those friends. But the most interesting was actually going to visit the owner, Adrian, at Verbier in Switzerland. And I've done some skiing before. Being a surfer, I thought, let's go skiing. And Adrian says, no, let's do toboggan. And he put me on this little Tupperware with a handle, and he showed me how to work the levers, and then he took off, and I had to follow him. And after wiping out about 3 or 4 times, I realized that when he brakes, he doesn't pull the one lever like he said to me. He pulls both levers and then just harder on the one you want to turn to. But he didn't tell me all of it. So I think he tried to write me off as well. But no, Verbier to me was really a highlight just to go to. And it's all thanks to wine. So wine's taken me to, and last year Malawi and Zambia, I didn't even know the people. And they know a lot about wine in those countries. So some interesting places.
Verbier, of course, very similar to Johannesburg. There are ski resorts and ones where you need some good red wine, which we have. We're going to be drinking some of the red wine from Taste in a moment, but let's head back now to Johan. And in the context of Vintage Day, Johan, there are 3 wines that we're going to be having a run through. And the first of them that I've got here is some 2015 Pinotage. Now, the moment you say red wine 2015 and Stellenbosch, everybody starts getting slightly overexcited and the price tag starts climbing very, very rapidly. But the focus generally in those conversations, Jan, is often around either a Bordeaux-style blend or a Cabernet Sauvignon. Tell me about Pinotage in 2015. Did it match the rest of the reds of Stellenbosch in being a particularly special year?
Yeah, well, the first red wine my father bottled at Simonsig under the label was 1970, and just recently I started doing a bit of research about who made the very first Pinotages in South Africa. So we all know the Landsrack 1959 was the very first one. And with the Simonsig 1970, I think in the bigger picture, it was probably number 4, number 5. And I haven't got all the facts researched yet. So we've had a very long relationship and a belief in the quality of pinotage. And the 2015 is coming from a very highly rated vintage. And I think over the years we've learned a couple of lessons about pinotage, and in this specific uh, style, we're making the wine to be very uh, fruit driven, quite soft in tannin, with maximum fruit expression. So there's actually very little wood involved in the maturation, so it protects the purity of fruit. And that's the style of the wine. And you know, one of the parents of Pinotage is Pinot Noir, which is known as one of the noble grapes of the world. And despite the fact that most Pinot Noirs have got quite light color, they're not very structured, so not a lot of tannin, but they do have this ability to mature for a very long time with really excellent results. So I always like to believe that Pinotage has inherited that characteristic from Pinot Noir, that it doesn't need to be big and powerful and very um, full-bodied and extracted to be able to mature. Sometimes you see beauty in the fact that the wine is elegant, it's got finesse, it's got purity of fruit. And I think this is what this 2015 Pinotage is all about. It does show the more elegant side of red wine and Pinotage specifically. So it is a red wine that doesn't make me think of a prop forward, but maybe more like a ballerina.
Which is quite a contrast. And the fact that you bring up that particular question of style is interesting. We tasted the new Ibn Sadi releases earlier on this week. I'll be talking about them on the show next week. And he's got a block of Pinotage. He's making some Pinotage. And when asked about the smile with Ibn's, when asked about the style, Ibn, with his trademark smile, said he wasn't making a hipster Pinotage. He was making something more substantial. Pinotage is in a very interesting space, and you seem to have preempted, to a degree, Johan, the style that we're seeing so much of in the last 2 or 3 vintages, which is that Pinotage paying tribute to its parent grapes, and Pinot Noir in particular, rather than that slightly heavier, more prop-forward style you reference. But what sparked it? What gave you the inspiration to say, hang on, this is how we can interpret it, as opposed to the way which a lot of the world has seen Pinotage for so long?
Yeah, I think, you know, because we started so many years ago, at that stage, Pinotage was not that well known, and we had to adapt the style to make it accessible and easier to drink. So from an early stage, we tried to accentuate the fruit, because I think that's definitely one of the prime characteristics of Pinotage, that it's got this incredibly beautiful and intense red berry fruit character. So the main I can say something that you have to be careful of when you're making Pinotage is that you don't try to force it, don't try to overdo it, and try to get the good points of Pinotage into the wine. And that's it's got beautiful intensity of color, but it's got the intensity of fruit, a lot of red berry and cherry and plum flavors. And I think what makes Pinotage so special. So the influence of oak is something that the winemaker can decide, and whether you want to make it in that style. But the 2015 you got there is made in a fresher, fruit-driven style without the strong influence of oak. We've got another Pinotage called the Red Hill Pinotage that's made in a more full-bodied style with a stronger influence of French oak. But the Simonsig Pinotage, like you've got there, is more maybe I like to call it the traditional style, without too much oak, but heavily reliant on the true Pinotage fruity flavor.
I think we're probably overdue having our mutual friend Bayers on the show to ask him about the role of Pinotage and its interpretation at the moment. I will ask you an extended Pinotage question. That takes us to our second wine we have. We've got some 2014 France Malan and the Cape blend. Pinotage having by law to fulfill at least 30% therein. Where do you feel Cape blends are at the moment? And I speak on the back of a conversation on Daryl Balfour's WhatsApp group, which generates 85,000 messages a day, where there was a conversation about Cape blend and where we are with it. And has it taken off? Has it not? How much of a role should it play in South Africa? Where do you see the Cape blend within the greater South African wine spectrum at the moment, Johan?
Well, I think, many years ago I was at a symposium in Cape Town about what is a truly traditional South African red blended wine, and that created a lot of discussion, because I think traditionally Cabernet with some Cinsault was perhaps the main combination of red blends in South Africa. And the reason for that is that Cabernet was quite shy bearing and more expensive, low yielding, and that meant that the Cinsault part was always used there to almost make it a bit more economical, and to add the Cinsault also soften the Cabernet. So that was traditionally quite a common blend in the South African context. But many years later, in the early 90s, the idea of using Pinotage as the main component in a red blend, with some Cabernet, or you could even use any of the other Bordeaux varieties, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, etc., and create something out of that. And that's where I started with the France Malan, is that Pinotage, when it gets older, tends to show, or it ages, getting almost like a sweet character coming from the fruit, not residual sugar sweetness, but the flavor components. And that is something that's very intrinsic and very typical of a Pinotage. But when you do the Cape blend and you introduce some Cabernet Sauvignon, being such a classic grape variety, it contributes something on the mid palate, which is the intensity of fruit. But Cabernet does have a certain almost like masculinity about the structure and the tannin, and that is almost like the counterfoil to the Pinotage that develops a certain sweetness. The Cabernet gives it a backbone, and what I specifically like about the blend is that Cabernet gives it a dry finish, and that keeps the Pinotage sweetness in check. We also use a small percentage of Merlot, and Merlot is a wonderful variety when it comes to any blend, because it's, I always say, when you have the three components, Cabernet, Pinotage, and Merlot, the Merlot is almost like the glue that melds everything together, but it also adds some blackberry fruit on the mid palate. So I really think that South Africa is a relatively young wine producing country, but and the future of the Cape blend is very positive, but it's going to take a long time for us to establish that, because I've seen it in wine tastings and competitions, how well these wines show up. And well, you can have three components like we have in the France Malan, or you can have even more other varieties, is that they complement each other, and there's a way that they almost, the end result is bigger than the sum of its parts. So I've got a very strong belief in the quality or the future of Cape blends, but going to establish something like this in 1 decade or 2 decades. It's definitely going to take quite a bit longer.
And part of that problem, as has pretty much been said,
we're running out of time.
Well, the other problem, Johan, is that, and you say so in not so many words, that we have some great Cape Blend. We also have some great Cabernet Sauvignon and some Cabernet Sauvignon Cinsault and Shiraz and Merlot, and the list goes on and on and on. So where do we drive our focus? It's not one we can answer immediately. What we can answer very quickly, though, is a question linked to this wine, just before we jump into the last of them. And I know we've mentioned this on the show before, but for people who perhaps weren't watching on that particular occasion or may have forgotten, remind us who the great Franz Malan was.
Well, I've got a lot of stories to tell and a lot of memories, and but I think one thing I learned from him is that you must always look beyond the horizon almost, and look at new opportunities. And I think in that respect he was very innovative, very incredibly energetic, and always wanted to be somebody that does something new or for the first time. And I think in the modern day wine industry in South Africa now, it's become very difficult to do something that hasn't been done before. But I think at that time in the 70s, 80s, when he started the first Method Champenoise, and together with his close friends started the Stellenbosch wine route. A lot of those things were possible, but it doesn't mean that you cannot be innovative and do new things in the industry. There's a whole new generation, a young generation that are making the industry very exciting. And I think it's in the same spirit of innovation and pioneering spirit that's still applicable today.
And which results in a wine I've got no doubt he'd be very proud of and probably enjoy a few glasses of as well, as he would the final wine to have a quick taste of. And I have to say, Johan, I've just had a glass of this. Taste is sitting beside me before he jumps back on the show in a moment. He had one sip and then finished the rest of his glass in one go. This is the 2011 Shiraz. The elegance and the freshness and the lightness of touch to a wine that is now 12 years old is as remarkable as it is delightful. Tell me a little bit about this wine and why after 12 years it is so absolutely lovely. Well,
you know, in the 90s, when South Africa entered the international market, there was a much bigger demand for red wines than what the local market was looking for. So we were planting a lot of new vineyards with Shiraz because there was a big demand not only locally but specifically on the export side. And the one thing about Shiraz is that it's very adaptable. It does well in many different regions in South Africa. You can go to Swartland, you can go to Robertson. They make wonderful Shiraz there. You can go to the Southern Cape, to Elim and Walker Bay, which is a lot cooler, and they make wonderful Shiraz there as well. So it's very adaptable, but our aim is to make a Shiraz that is a reflection of our Stellenbosch climate and terroir. And I think over time we have moved away from these big, powerful, almost overripe Shirazes that we were doing 10, 20 years ago. The 2011 is from a vintage where the wines were a lot more fresh and elegant with finesse. And it's good to see that after, what's it now, 12 years, it's really matured well, but it still has the freshness of a primary fruit. which is it doesn't show a lot of the aging characteristics, and I think that's a good sign that the wine is on a good route and it's maturing well. It's integrated. It's got the softness and the velvety tannins, and that I think is a good example of what you expect of a wine after 12 years.
And none of that sort of metallic rim or hint of a port-like characteristic. You just absolutely demolished your glass there, Thys Lombard.
Well, I'm flying. I'm scared of flying, so I needed something to get me through this. Now, these wines are lovely, and I think the thread through all these wines are, as Johan mentioned, they don't over oak these wines. If your fruit's healthy and your winemaking processes and procedures are in good nick, you don't have to kill everything with wood and oak. And I think these wines, and in wine the most important thing is balance. So if you know what you're doing and the fruit's in balance, the acidity, the natural acidity in the wine's good, these wines will age. And I mean they in their infancy stages. I think if I taste these wines, they haven't even started changing their color. There's no brownish tint on any of these wines, and 11, 12 years down the line. So I think they've still got, I don't know if we've got the time to keep them that long, but they're beautiful wines. Yeah, well done, Johan. I mean, you're a great ambassador for South African wines and Simonsig as a brand. So super proud of these wines.
Well, they're getting the vote of endorsement from both of us. If you would like them, you'll be able to get them at Vintage Day, and we'll get some final thoughts on exactly how to be part of Vintage Day with Johan in a moment. I'll tell you that Michelle Stradham reckons they are delicious wines from Simonsig. She's watching on Facebook at the moment. And when speaking about that Shiraz, very simply, that wine rocks. I think you've picked up, Michelle, both Thys and I think exactly the same thing. Idani Billy Moses Makaramedza says you should run a competition soon. Well, we are. If you buy any bottle of the Beast's new wine at Norman Goodfellows at the moment, you're going to a draw to win a case of it signed by the man himself. So Idani, get shopping. There you go. There's your chance. With the Beast, you get to win yourself the chance to go and buy some wine and to win a case signed by Beast. Alicia Moret, thanks for the insight. I'll need to get some of these mentioned in the discussion today, Alicia. I think that is a very good idea. And Alicia follows up with, will there be a Vintage Day event in Cape Town as well? Well, the Vintage Day is actually out at Simonsig, and we'll get some final details on that. It's the 29th of July in just a moment, Alicia, so don't go away. And then Simonsig themselves sending in a proud message. Big congrats to Johan and Michael on the ABSA Vintage Pinotage competition with Red Hill Pinotage 2012. So congratulations there. Some great wine we're drinking here. Wine that is aged. You've also got wine that's definitely got the potential to do exactly the same thing, because you've got that winning combination of great winemaker, great terroir. And we drink a lot of the Oldenburg here. My wife tends to get hold of it quite quickly, and then it doesn't last very long. And one we both really, really enjoy, and we've tasted it with you down at the estate with the family, is the Cabernet Franc. And I mention that not just because it's a really good wine, but because this Cabernet Franc revival is in such an exciting space, and revival in the sense that it's never been one in the spotlight until the last while. I think Norma Radcliffe was part, along with Brewerats, of really kicking it off and giving it its own space. But just in the last decade, and probably less than that, Cabernet Franc is suddenly a lead act.
Yeah, I think the winemakers are beginning to understand the Cabernet Franc as a grape. So it's often been used as a Bordeaux blending component. But it's actually the first vineyards that were planted in 2003 at Oldenburg were Cabernet Franc vineyards. And 2007, the first wines made at Oldenburg were also Cabernet Franc. It was called Le Quatre Enfants, which is French for the 4 children. And Adrian's got 4 boys, and I think we've got about 30 bottles left. And they aged incredibly well for vines that were only 4 years old. And those are the wines that Adrian realized that if we can make wines that age and do so well from such young vineyards, the terroir must be special. And it's also very interesting. I think Nick worked at Chateau Angelus. I don't know if it was more than one harvest, but he worked obviously with Cabernet Franc. And when he came for the interview with Adrian, and he wasn't really sure whether he was going to leave Warwick or not, Adrian gave him a bottle after, I think it was a 4-hour interview, as Adrian tends to do long interviews. He gave him a bottle of that 2007 Cabernet Franc. Nick went home, opened it with his wife, and the next morning he phoned Adrian and he says, if that's 3-4-year-old vines that make wines like this, I want to work with this one. So Cabernet Franc has been special. Our neighbors at Rainbow's End, they're also well known for their Cabernet Franc. And as you mentioned, Brevet Raat's been a trendsetter for many years. So I think Cabernet Franc, and Cabernet Franc is one of the parents with Sauvignon Blanc of Cabernet Sauvignon. So people have been drinking at least 50% of Cabernet Franc when they've been drinking Cabernet Sauvignon. There's some DNA there that's quite special.
So a wonderful wine, the 2017, a particularly good vintage. You'll be wrapping up with some of that a little later on this evening. Wine that's got the potential to age, and it's wine that I think you're going to let age. I get the sense there will be library selections set aside, and you will be keeping a lot of your reds in particular, some of the whites as well, because this is very much a story in the making, and there's a real investment in the time and the future and the vision of where Oldenburg's going to go.
Yeah, so I mean, we're selling currently in the trade, we're selling the 2017. We sold out on the 2018, and instead of moving on to the 2019, we decided, the 2017 is showing so well, let's release the 2017. So we've still got some of that wines, and I mean the reviews have been excellent. So it just shows you that South Africans can make wines that age well, and it's interesting to drink older wines. We tend to drink our wines way too young, and I understand why some people release very young vintages. But if you're able to cellar your wines and you keep them for a while, I mean, they just show, as Johan mentioned earlier, the primary flavors, then you have fermentation, you have the secondary flavors, but 7, 8, 9 years down the line, you're beginning to get these aged flavors, which people call the tertiary flavors. Yeah. And that's truly special to drink wines that, sometimes wines that are your age or your children's age at least, which is special. You've got young kids. My kids are 25 already, so struggling to find those wines.
Alicia Murray chips in again, watching Love Oldenburg Vineyards, one farm we visited several times. The Rondicott per se is one of my personal favorite reds, and the view from the tasting room is memorable. All the more so when Thys is going for one of his shirtless walks, which is one of the big tourist attractions. Talking about older wines, let's jump back there to Johan for one last time. Johan, the vintage day is coming up. It is next Saturday. How do people come? Where do they come? What can they expect when they come? Give us the rundown on a really cool day in store. Oh, I think we've just lost Johan there for a moment. We'll see if we can get him back in a second. It's the kind of thing you and me as wine nerds going to spend a day hanging out with all the vintages. Doesn't get much better, does it?
I'm thinking of cancelling my rugby photography on Saturday.
That would be a big sacrifice if you know Thys.
Well, at least it's Johan's old school. It's Paul Roos, so I'll go and support Paul Roos. But I might pop in and go and visit Johan afterwards. It's a real privilege. I
think it'd be a really good idea. Let's have another quick check, see if we can jump in with Johan, see if we have got him back. Are we winning? No, it doesn't look like we are just yet. So let me tell you what you can do. If you head over, very simply, go to plankton.mobi. You can see that on the bottom of your screen. We'll have everything up on our social media platforms as well. But plankton.mobi, and here we go. You use SS Wine Club for a 100 Rand discount. If you want to get your ticket to Vintage Day, it is the chance to go out and to taste all of these older vintages, to buy some as well. It's from 11 o'clock on the 29th of July at Simonsig Wine Estate. Look, you'd want to go out there just to see the estate, which is lovely, and drink the wine. To now be able to drink vintage wine, to buy some of that wine is a really, really special opportunity. And as you've heard from Johan speaking about the wine, from me tasting them, from Thys tasting them as well, you've got some really excellent wines that are still very much in the first flushes of youth, and well worth having a go at. So if you're down in the Cape, Alicia, this might be one for you. Plankton.mobi, go in, use that SS Wine Club code, and that is your 100 Rand discount. Let's have one last crack at Johan. I think we might just have got him back. I'm hearing some stirrings in the background. There we go. So Johan, just to confirm, it's next Saturday from 11 o'clock out at Simonsig. What can people expect when they come out for the day?
Well, we've got a beautiful selection of 40 different vintage wines that can be anything from 5 years old to 20 years old. White wines, red wines, as well as some of our older vintages of Cabernet Sauvignon. all open for tasting, and also you can purchase a few bottles to take home. So prices are also quite reasonable, because we want to get these wines out there. And it's been one of the spin-offs that I've had a lot of pleasure in experiencing. That I've had friends sending me pictures of the vintage day wines that they've been opening in places like Amsterdam, with their children living over there. And so I think it's a real good fun day, and it's also quite educational, because it's not only tasting one vintage of a specific wine, but you can almost do like a vertical of one specific wine, like our Tiara, and see how the older wines differ from the younger vintages. So it's a really a day where you can experience wines over spanning many different vintages, which is almost like a unique opportunity in the context of the South African industry.
My only downside to all of this is you very kindly invited me to come and join you, Johan, and thank you. Sadly, I'm going to be stuck watching the Springboks put 200 points past Argentina up in Johannesburg, but I might try and sneak a bottle of vintage Simonsig into Ellis Park with me. Sorry, Emirates Airline Park. During the game. Johan, best of luck with it. And I think just important to reinforce that, yes, it's the opportunity to drink some older wine and to discover them and to see why older wine is of such value. But it's also a chance to go and appreciate one of the great legacies of the Cape wine industry, what you and your family have put into South African wine, and what you've given so much of us by way of pleasure and history and enjoyment. So have a wonderful day, but on everybody else who's going to come out there is going to experience something very special. And thank you for opening up the history of Simonsig to everybody for the day.
Thanks very much for having us, Dad. It's always nice talking to you, and also good to hear some of the history and the background of Oldenburg wines. So to you and your listeners, thanks for having me.
There we go, Johan Malan. So you're going to be out on your way there. An invitation from Johan for people to go and join him. 100 Rand off plankton.mobi to go up to Vintage Day next Saturday. I suspect there's probably an open invitation from Thys for you to come along, do some tasting and experience the magic of Oldenburg.
Of course, Oldenburg is always open for tasting, and we do have a nice tasting. I mean, our tasting room staff are all qualified WSET 2, 3, and even some of them WSET 4 qualified. So we pride ourselves in presenting a really good wine tasting experience. And I mean, you've seen the views. What God's created there is second to none. The wines do taste better when you sit there and you have that cheese platter in front of you and you have the view in front of you. You don't have to walk around Ronnekop to enjoy it, but you can if you want to join.
And just to confirm, that's a wine tasting, THYSTING. We've got Wine Royalty watching the show as we wrap up. Siobhan Thompson, great show as usual, Dan. Siobhan, thank you. Expect a phone call from me soon, Siobhan. We're looking to get you on the show in the next little while. Which leads me to say a huge thank you to the team from Simonsig, and particularly Johan. Please get out to Vintage Day next Saturday. Post photos, tag us, let us know how it went. I'd love to hear. I'm very sorry I'm not going to be there myself. And get out to Oldenburg and do likewise, and look out for taste. There are a few better hosts when it comes to getting out to the winelands. That leaves me to say goodbye. I'm off to spend an evening with some guests drinking some more wine, which I just have to do for work purposes. These are some of our sacrifices. Thys, thanks for dropping by the cellar. Really appreciate it. Safe travels back to the Cape.
Thank you very much, Dan. What a privilege. Nice to be here. Thanks.
And I look forward to seeing you all back again next week on Monday, when I will be at the DGB Trade Show, drinking wine with winemakers and Chairman Tim Hutchinson, with brands along the lines of Boschendal and Bellingham and Friars Cove and Old Road, and a whole pile more. So look out for that on Monday. Also look out on Sunday, the chance to buy some vintage Thelema, some vintage Savage, and some vintage Rats at the latest Strauss auction. And that goes live at 11 o'clock on Sunday on the Strauss website. Some really nice wine there. And also look out for next week. We've got some cool stuff coming up with some international wine for a little bit of contrast and comparison. That does it for today. Stay warm, keep drinking great South African wine. Get to Vintage Day, get to Oldenburg, and get back on Dan Really Likes Wine next week. Until then, happy drinking. See you next time. Goodbye.